What if the greatest gift you could ever leave behind is one you don't actually leave behind at all? What if you gave away your inheritance while you were still alive? Just to watch it change lives.
Yeah, it really flips the whole script on its head, doesn't it?
It totally does. Welcome back to Best Book Summary. Today we're diving into a framework that it basically dismantles everything we've been taught about legacy and wealth and just true fulfillment.
Right, we're taking a really close look at the July 2025 release, The Happiness Experiment. It's subtitled A Revolutionary Way to Increase Happiness by Carl B. Barney.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive, and I want to speak directly to you, the listener right now, is to really unpack Barney's, well, his radical blueprint for engineering joy.
Engineering joy, it's such a specific phrase.
Yeah, and we're going to examine how a really terrifying brush with mortality kind of birthed this entire new philosophy of giving. And more importantly, how you, whether you have like millions in the bank or literally just your time and your energy, how you can apply these tools, things he calls happiness planning and happiness coaching, to your own life today.
Which is so crucial because honestly, the premise immediately forces this sort of confrontation with how passive we usually are about fulfillment.
Oh, passive is the perfect word. We treat it like the weather.
Exactly. Like it's just something that happens to us. You look at standard self-help stuff and you usually find these really vague platitudes about, finding your bliss or whatever.
Just the flow.
Right. But this text, it operates at a very different intersection. It takes the rigid analytical tools of like business management and it combines them with behavioral psychology, and then it underpins that whole structure with this unapologetic, deeply specific philosophical framework.
It's intense.
It is. The author is basically arguing that true enduring joy is not an accident of circumstance. I mean, he's saying it is a manufactured outcome.
Okay, I really want to push on that manufactured outcome idea.
Yeah.
Because it sounds almost counterintuitive. But to understand how Barney even arrived at this rigid, systematic view of human emotion, we kind of have to look at the inciting incident, right?
Yeah, the catalyst for the whole thing.
Exactly. The genesis of this entire book is a really terrifying brush with death. Barney is this highly successful, self-taught entrepreneur and philanthropist, and suddenly he just faces his own mortality.
Right, he's looking right at the end.
And he's forced to look at everything he's built and ask, well, what is this actually all for?
Yeah, and psychologists actually refer to this as mortality salience.
Mortality salience. Okay, break that down for me.
So when a human being is confronted with the undeniable reality of their own impending death-like, not just an abstract concept, but real imminent death, the psychological friction is just immense.
Because you can't ignore it anymore.
Right. The brain can't rely on the comfort of someday anymore. Like someday I'll travel, or someday I'll write that book, someday I'll figure out what to do with my savings.
It's always someday.
Exactly. But mortality salience, it strips away that buffer of time completely. It demands this immediate audit of your actual lived values.
Wow.
Yeah, and for someone like Barney, who has spent a lifetime accumulating resources, we're talking capital, knowledge, influence, the sudden realization that, hey, you cannot take any of this with you, it forces a massive cognitive pivot.
You have to change course.
You do. You shift from accumulating for the future to deploying for the present.
And the typical deployment method for wealth, when you're looking at the end of your life, it's just the will, right? You draft a document, you designate a bequest, and your wealth is distributed to family or friends or charities long after you're gone.
Right. It's the standard operating procedure for legacy. It's what everyone does.
But the text details how Barney looked at that standard procedure and found it completely unacceptable. He decided to invent this entirely new mechanism, which he coined the prequest.
Yeah, the prequest. And that linguistic shift, going from bequest to prequest, that is the linchpin of this entire philosophy.
How so?
Well, think about a bequest. It is inherently passive, right? It's an action that's only triggered by your absence. You accumulate all these resources, but you don't actually get to participate in the actualization of them.
You're not there to see it.
Exactly. But a prequest completely inverts that power dynamic and the timeline. It demands your presence.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah, by giving the inheritance while he was still alive and healthy, Barney basically transformed this posthumous administrative task into a living, breathing, relational experiment.
Okay, let's visualize the mechanics of that for a second. Because traditional legacy planning, it's like planting a seed, walking away, and then just hoping the tree provides shade for your kids long after you're in the ground.
You never see the leaves.
Right. You never see the leaves. But Barney is saying, no, let's plant the seed right now. Let's water it together, and I want to actually sit in the shade of that tree with you.
That's a great analogy. And practically speaking, it forces accountability on both sides, which is a really crucial element we see later in his methodology.
Because it's happening right in front of him.
Yes, when you give someone a massive financial grant while you are still sitting across the table from them, the relational dynamic changes entirely. It is no longer, a ghost leaving a windfall.
That's so true. It's a real person.
Right. It is a living mentor, a friend, offering a tool. And the book details how he deployed these happiness grants to 20 of his friends. This is the literal happiness experiment that the title refers to.
It's wild to think about. Just imagine picking up the phone and hearing, hey, I was going to leave you this in my will, but I almost died, so here's your inheritance today. Go flourish.
It would be a shock, to say the least.
A huge shock. But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Handing someone a pile of cash doesn't automatically equate to a happy ending.
No, definitely not.
Like, we've all seen the statistics on lottery winners. A huge percentage of people who receive a sudden windfall, they end up bankrupt, or totally isolated, or deeply depressed within just a few years. Sudden wealth often destroys lives rather than enhancing them.
Absolutely. It can be incredibly destabilizing.
So how did this not just become a massive disaster of mismanaged funds and ruined friendships for him?
Well, that is the exact friction point the author anticipated. And it is why the book is not simply a memoir about a guy writing checks to his buddies.
Okay.
The text makes it very clear that the experiment was profoundly successful, not because of the money itself, but because of the framework that he attached to it.
The strings attached, so to speak.
Kind of, yeah. But however, before we even get into that framework, we have to address the author's primary motivation for the experiment in the first place, because it completely disrupts how we normally view philanthropy.
Right, because usually we think of charity as this totally selfless act.
Exactly. But the text states unequivocally that giving these grants was a way to profoundly enhance Barney's own life.
Which, I mean, that flies in the face of the martyrdom model of charity we're usually taught, right? The cultural narrative is that giving should hurt a little bit.
Yes.
Like, it should be a sacrifice. You deplete yourself to elevate someone else. That's the noble thing to do.
Right. The martyrdom model relies heavily on this idea of self-abnegation. It suggests that your moral worth in giving is directly tied to your level of suffering or deprivation.
How much it hurts you to give it away.
Exactly. But Barney's framework rejects that entirely. The book posits that giving should be a highly intentional mechanism to elevate the giver's joy.
Okay, break that down. How does giving away millions elevate his joy?
Think about the psychological feedback loop here. He gives a grant to a friend who is struggling to fund a creative project.
Okay.
The friend receives the capital, they build the project, and they experience this massive surge in life satisfaction. Well, Barney gets to watch that happen in real time.
He's right there.
Yes. He gets to experience the relief, the excitement, and the eventual triumph of someone he deeply cares about. That shared joy directly compounds his own baseline of happiness.
He is basically buying front row tickets to the flourishing of the people he loves.
That's exactly what he's doing.
It's an investment in his own social and emotional ecosystem.
And an ecosystem he still inhabits, which is the key. By accelerating the inheritance, he surrounds himself with people who are suddenly unshackled from immediate financial terror.
Which allows them to self-actualize.
Precisely. And surrounding yourself with self-actualizing, joyful people is an incredibly effective way to ensure your own daily environment is vibrant and fulfilling.
It makes sense. But again, this brings us back to that lottery winner problem.
Right, the mismanagement risk.
Yeah, to ensure these friends actually self-actualized, instead of just, buying a fleet of sports cars and crashing them, he had to build a system.
He did.
He extracted this replicable methodology from the raw experiment. The book presents a framework built on 3 pillars, which are happiness grants, happiness coaching, and happiness planning.
Yes, those are the 3 pillars.
And I have a major block here, I have to admit. When it comes to the idea of coaching and planning an emotion, it sounds really clinical to me.
It's a common reaction.
Like, if I have to map out my joy on a spreadsheet and schedule it for 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, doesn't it lose its magic? The best moments in life always feel so spontaneous to me.
The resistance to scheduling joy is incredibly common. Like I said, we really romanticize spontaneity in our culture.
You do.
We love the idea of wandering into a beautiful sunset or having this unplanned, profound conversation at a coffee shop. But the text challenges the sustainability of that romanticism.
Why isn't it sustainable?
Because relying exclusively on spontaneous joy is a really high-risk life strategy. If your fulfillment is entirely dependent on serendipity, you are at the absolute mercy of your environment. You're basically just waiting for the world to serve you a good day.
And the world doesn't always cooperate.
Exactly. The book argues that while spontaneous pleasure is wonderful, enduring, structural happiness requires architecture.
Architecture. Okay, and architecture requires blueprints and load-bearing walls.
Precisely. Let's use that analogy. It's a good one. Spontaneous joy, the sunset, the great meal, the sudden laugh, that is the paint on the walls.
Okay.
It's the furniture. It makes the house beautiful, right? But if you don't have load-bearing walls, which represent your core values, your deliberate purpose, your financial stability, your health, the house just collapses the moment a storm hits.
So true.
No amount of spontaneous paint is going to hold up a rotting roof. So happiness coaching and happiness planning, those are the engineering tools used to build the load-bearing walls.
Ah.
That way, when the spontaneous moments happen, you actually have a safe, stable structure in which to enjoy them.
That reframes it completely for me.
Okay.
So I am not scheduling the laugh itself. I am building the environment where the laugh is actually possible. And the book gives us a very rigid 4-step blueprint for how to build this structure. Let's stress test these steps a bit. Step 1 is discover your core values to achieve happiness.
The foundational step.
But see, this sounds like corporate jargon again. Every company has a core values poster in the break room that nobody actually reads. How does a person actually discover a core value that isn't just some generic buzzword?
Well, the corporate poster is a perfect example of what not to do.
Yeah.
Those are usually aspirational values things a company wishes it was, like, oh, we're innovative or we're transparent. But in the context of this book, discovering your personal core values requires a brutal audit of your actual lived behavior.
A brutal audit. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because values are not what you say, they are what you do. The text implies this process of, like, behavioral archaeology. You have to look at where you actually spend your money, where you spend your time, and what triggers your deepest angers and your greatest satisfactions.
Okay, let's try to apply this in real time. Let's invent a hypothetical guy. We'll call him Mark.
Okay, Mark.
Mark says his core value is family. But if we do this behavioral archaeology on him and look at Mark's calendar, he works 80 hours a week, plays golf on Saturday, and watches football all day on Sunday.
Right. In that scenario, Mark's stated value is family, but his operational values are status, career advancement, and personal leisure.
His actions don't match his words at all.
Exactly. And the friction between a stated value and an operational value is the root of massive psychological distress for a lot of people.
Because you're basically living a lie.
Yeah, and the author's concept of happiness coaching at this stage involves forcing the individual to confront that exact discrepancy. You simply cannot begin to plan for joy if you are lying to yourself about what actually matters to you.
So what does Mark do?
Well, if Mark truly values career advancement above all else, he needs to admit that and engineer his life accordingly without the guilt of pretending he is a family-first guy. Or, conversely, he needs to massively restructure his calendar to reflect his stated value of family.
Well, he has to choose.
He has to choose. The discovery phase is all about establishing a bedrock of ruthless honesty.
Because if you build your happiness plan on a lie, the house falls down.
Exactly.
Okay, so once Mark finally admits what his true operational values are, the book tells us we move to step 2. Use deliberate planning to find your purpose. The phrasing here is interesting to me. You don't discover a purpose like you find a lost set of keys. You use deliberate planning to find it.
Yeah, purpose is so often treated as this mystical calling that will just one day strike you like lightning.
Right, like an epiphany.
But the text fundamentally rejects that mysticism. Purpose is a construct. It is the actionable manifestation of the core values you identified in step 1.
Okay, so it's something you build.
Yes. If we go back to the idea of the autodidact entrepreneur, which is exactly how the author describes himself, the approach is highly pragmatic. You look at your values as raw materials, and your purpose is the machine you build to process those materials.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. If your core value is intellectual curiosity, your purpose is not going to suddenly appear out of thin air. Your deliberate plan must involve structuring your daily life to pursue complex information.
Like going back to school or something.
Or perhaps by allocating dedicated hours every morning to study, engaging in debate, or writing. The plan forces the value into reality.
It's treating your life with the same operational rigor a CEO treats a Fortune 500 company.
That's a great way to look at it.
A CEO doesn't just, hope the company is profitable. They have a daily, weekly, and quarterly operational plan. Which brings us to step 3. And this seems to be where that lottery winner trap gets disarmed.
Right, this is crucial.
Step 3. Determine what brings you real joy and fulfillment. Based on his observations of those 20 friends, Barney draws a really hard line between short-term pleasure and actual fulfillment.
He does, a very stark line.
So how are we defining those two things neurologically and psychologically? Because I gotta be honest, eating a donut brings me a lot of joy.
Well, eating a donut brings you a dopamine spike.
Okay, fair enough.
And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of anticipation and immediate reward. It is evolutionarily designed to make you seek out quick calories or, short-term mating opportunities.
It's biological bribery.
Exactly. The problem with dopamine, though, is that it is highly transient and it creates a refractory period, basically a crash.
Right.
You eat the donut, you feel great for 10 minutes, and then you feel sluggish and you just want another donut. That is pleasure, as a biological trick to ensure short-term survival.
So what's the alternative? What is real fulfillment?
The book's concept of real joy and fulfillment aligns much more closely with the sustained release of serotonin and oxytocin. These are associated with long-term contentment, social bonding, and the achievement of difficult, value-aligned goals.
Oh, wow. So when the 20 friends received those massive grants, the coaching was there to steer them away from the dopamine spikes like buying the Ferrari, taking the endless luxury vacations, and steer them toward the serotonin builders.
Exactly. The coaching likely forced them to pause and ask, will this purchase or this life change merely spike my dopamine, or will it create a sustainable environment for long-term flourishing?
That's a huge distinction.
It is. Like, if a friend used the grant to quit a soul-crushing job and fund a risky but deeply meaningful startup venture, that process would be incredibly stressful.
Oh yeah, startups are nightmare fuel sometimes.
Right. It wouldn't be pleasurable in the moment-to-moment sense at all. But it would provide profound fulfillment because it aligns with a core value of autonomy or creativity.
It's building the load-bearing walls.
Yes. The book demands that you become highly literate in your own emotional responses, distinguishing between what is just a distraction and what is a meaningful pursuit.
Which culminates in the final piece of the framework, step 4. Create a step-by-step plan to increase your happiness. You take that ruthless honesty about your values, your constructed purpose, your understanding of true fulfillment, and you build the spreadsheet. You build the architectural blueprint.
It is the ultimate synthesis of his business acumen and his psychological observation. The author is demanding that the reader stop being a passive consumer of self-help literature and become an active project manager of their own psyche.
A project manager of your own psyche. That sounds exhausting, but really effective.
It requires work, certainly. You identify the metrics of your own flourishing. If deep social connection is a core value for you, what is the step-by-step plan? Is it hosting a dinner every Thursday? Is it scheduling uninterrupted phone calls with a sibling twice a week? You measure the inputs and you track the emotional outputs.
It's intense. It requires a level of self-scrutiny that, let's be honest, most people spend their entire lives actively avoiding.
Oh, absolutely. Avoidance is much easier.
So to understand why someone would default to this level of rigorous, almost clinical self-management, we really need to examine the architect himself, who looks at human joy and says, yeah, let's put some KPIs, key performance indicators on this.
It takes a very specific type of mind.
The text gives us a specific profile of Carl Barney. It says he is a self-taught, lifelong learner and educational entrepreneur, and he is deeply embedded in a very specific, often controversial philosophical worldview.
Yes, and the autodidact component of his background, that simply cannot be overstated here.
Why is that so important?
Because when you are self-taught, particularly in dense, complex fields like philosophy, psychology, and management, you do not learn for the sake of passing academic exams. You learn strictly for utility.
You want to use it.
You are hunting for systems that solve real-world problems. An autodidact filters all information through a hyper-pragmatic lens. Therefore, when this kind of mind encounters a nebulous, highly subjective concept like happiness, the immediate instinct is to build a scaffolding around it.
They need structure.
Yes, the autodidact cannot tolerate undefined variables.
But the scaffolding he chooses is not neutral. The source material is very explicit about his ideological foundations. It highlights his deep admiration for Aristotle, and more prominently, for Ayn Rand.
Yes, the objectivist connection is very strong.
He views Rand's objectivism as the ultimate, quote, philosophy for success. The text notes he founded the Prometheus Foundation to promote rational philosophy, and he has served on the boards of the Ayn Rand Institute, the Cato Institute, and the Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism.
Right.
Now, I want to make sure we look at this impartially, because objectivism is famously polarizing. We're not taking sides on the politics of it, but we have to ask, how does a philosophy anchored in extreme individualism and rational self-interest lead a man to hand out his fortune to 20 friends?
It's a great question.
Because for a lot of people, the words philanthropy and objectivism are mutually exclusive.
And that perceived contradiction is really the crux of the book's philosophical weight. To understand it, we must strip away the cultural caricatures of objectivism and look at how the text actually applies its core tenets.
Okay, let's do that.
Ayn Rand's philosophy of rational egoism asserts that the moral purpose of a human life is the achievement of one's own happiness. It vehemently rejects the ethics of altruism. If altruism is strictly defined as self-sacrifice, where the moral value of an action is determined by how much you give up for others.
Right. The traditional view is that giving $100 to a stranger hurts you financially, but it helps them, therefore it is a moral act.
Yes.
Objectivism looks at that and says, wait, why is your suffering the metric for morality?
Exactly. In the objectivist framework presented by the author's life, a rational man does not sacrifice his higher values for lower ones. So how does giving away millions of dollars fit into this? The answer lies in the concept of value.
Value.
The author is not sacrificing his wealth. He's trading it for something he values significantly more.
He's trading financial capital for emotional and psychological capital.
Yes. If you deeply value human potential, intelligence, and the specific virtues of your close friends, then those friends are high values in your life.
Okay, I'm following.
Investing your resources to remove their financial constraints and watch them flourish is a profound expression of your own values. It is a deeply rational, self-interested action. You are actively cultivating a reality that brings you immense joy.
I want to make sure I am grasping the nuance here, because it's subtle but important. If I give money to a random charity I don't care about, just out of a sense of societal guilt, Rand's philosophy would view that as an immoral sacrifice of my resources.
Because it's driven by guilt, not your actual values.
Right. But if I give that same amount of money to my best friend so he can start a business, because seeing him succeed makes my life infinitely better and more interesting, that is a moral, rational act.
In the context of the philosophy outlining this book, yes, absolutely. The text explicitly points out that the experiment was a deeply meaningful and fulfilling way to enhance his own life.
He isn't playing the martyr.
Not at all. He is being an incredibly savvy emotional investor. He's maximizing his returns by investing in the people who constitute his social world. It removes the guilt from wealth and the resentment from charity.
It fundamentally cleanses the transaction. The recipient doesn't feel like a burden or a charity case. They are a valued investment. And the giver doesn't feel drained. They feel empowered.
It's a win-win based on mutual respect rather than pity.
And this ties directly back to his other major philosophical influence mentioned in the text, which is Aristotle.
Yes, the Aristotelian influence provides the overarching goal of the entire project.
How does Aristotle fit into the spreadsheets and the coaching?
Well, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics revolves around this concept of eudaimonia. This is frequently translated in modern English simply as happiness, but scholars universally agree that flourishing is a much more accurate translation.
Flourishing. That implies action to me. Like, a plant doesn't just be happy, it flourishes through growth, adaptation, and vitality.
Exactly. Eudaimonia is not a fleeting state of mind. It is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. It is the realization of your highest human potential.
So it's active, not passive.
Highly active. When Barney talks about happiness coaching and determining real joy, he is effectively trying to operationalize Aristotle. Remember the dopamine pleasure we discussed earlier, the donuts and the sports cars?
Yeah, the biological bribes.
Aristotle called that hedonia, and he viewed it as a lower pursuit, fit for grazing animals. Eudaimonia, on the other hand, requires rationality, deliberate planning, and the pursuit of excellence.
Okay, so bringing it back to the prequest.
The author used his wealth to buy his friends the ultimate luxury, the time and the freedom to pursue eudaimonia, to pursue flourishing without the distraction of survival panic.
We've looked at the man, we've unpacked this incredibly dense philosophical machinery, from Rand to Aristotle, and we've walked through the step-by-step methodology. Let's talk about the aftermath.
The result.
The text details the ripple effect of this experiment. It
Yeah.
talks about how the recipients' lives were changed forever, altering their perspectives on what true happiness actually means. We are looking at a localized cultural transformation here.
The results of the experiment completely validated his hypothesis. When you remove the existential dread of financial ruin and replace it with structured philosophical coaching, the human beings in the experiment didn't devolve into laziness.
They didn't just sit on the couch all day playing video games.
No, they didn't. They pursued meaningful work. They redefined their relationships. They began to operate from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. And that transformation is what actually prompted the writing of the book itself.
He realized the framework was just too valuable to keep confined to 20 people.
Exactly. The text notes his overarching goal is a testament to the transformative power of education and philosophy. He wants to influence the broader cultural landscape.
Which is a massive goal.
It is. He understands that he cannot hand out financial prequests to 8 billion people on the planet, but he can distribute the intellectual machinery.
The blueprint.
Yes. By publishing The Happiness Experiment, he is attempting to scale eudaimonia. He is giving the reader the tools to act as their own happiness coach, to build their own load-bearing walls.
Which brings this entirely back to you, listening right now. It is very easy to listen to a story about a wealthy philanthropist handing out grants to his buddies and think, well, must be nice. If I had his bank account, I'd be happy too, but I'm just trying to pay my rent, so this doesn't apply to me at all.
Right, that's the immediate cynical reaction.
But the genius of a philosophical framework is that it is infinitely scalable down to the micro level.
Yeah.
You don't need a $1 million grant to
Yeah.
execute step one and audit your core values.
The currency changes, but the methodology remains identical.
Explain that. What currency do we have if we don't have millions?
You possess resources right now that are extraordinarily valuable, even if they aren't liquid capital. You possess time. You possess attention,
Yep.
which is arguably the most fiercely contested resource in the modern world.
Very true.
You possess specialized knowledge and emotional bandwidth. The book challenges you to look at those resources and apply the concept of the prequest to them.
Okay, I love this. How do you issue a prequest with your time?
You apply the exact same rational self-interest we discussed earlier. Instead of hoarding your time or spending it passively doom-scrolling, which, by the way, is the time equivalent of a dopamine sugar rush, you deliberately invest it in the flourishing of the people around you.
Give me a practical example.
You act as a mentor. You use your weekends to help a friend rebuild their deck, not out of a sense of draining obligation, but because the shared labor and their subsequent joy directly enhances your own environment.
It makes your world better.
Yes. You apply happiness planning to your Tuesday evenings. You stop waiting for a financial windfall to give you permission to engineer your life.
It is about taking radical, terrifying responsibility for your own fulfillment.
Terrifying is the right word because it means you can't make excuses anymore.
You are no longer allowed to blame the weather, the economy, or just bad luck for a lack of purpose. You have the blueprint. You identify what matters. You ruthlessly align your schedule to it. You reject cheap pleasure in favor of deep flourishing. And you actively invest your energy into the people you love because their success is your success.
It really is a revolutionary way to look at how we navigate our brief time here.
It really is.
Think deeply about the concept of the prequest as we close this analysis. The psychological shift from passive legacy to active investment is profound.
It changes everything.
If you could give a living inheritance today, not a trust fund, but your undivided attention, your hardest-earned wisdom, or your raw energy, who are the people in your life you would strategically invest in to intentionally engineer your own highest joy?
Man, that is a heavy question. And that is the challenge for you this week. If you want more step-by-step blueprints extracted from the world's most transformative books, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling us what your actual operational core values are and what one specific step you are adding to your happiness plan this week. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you in the next summary.